Okay, good morning, everybody. It is 11 o'clock Eastern Time, 10 o'clock Central Time, and welcome to November's Webinar Wednesday. Our topic today is Hurricane Harvey, Major Storm, Major Challenge. As always, feel free, if you have any questions, to use the hashtag NWAWebWed, it's hashtag NWAWEBWED, or ask questions through the GoToMeeting question. You can raise your hand, or you can just ask the questions through the question tab. My name is Tricia Palmer. I am the Professional Development Committee co-chair and the webinar team leader for now. Just so that you guys know, in the future, if you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, anything like that about the webinars, we do have a new email that goes to all the webinar team members, and that's webinar@nwas.org. Before we get to our presenters, I do want to go over a couple of quick administrative notes. For future webinars, those who plan to give webinars, we do have a new speaker release form that we need you guys to fill out, so that will be sent to the speakers ahead of time. We're going to ask that you guys use the 16:9 format so that it fills up everybody's screens. We're transitioning to that as we're moving forward. And also, we use either GoToWebinar or Google Hangouts, and of course, Google Hangouts people will see you, but if you're going to be using GoToWebinar, we want to see you, so please include a picture in your presentation as we move forward. Again, like I said already, if you've got ideas or comments or suggestions, send them to us at webinar@nwas.org. That goes to the entire webinar team. And speaking of the webinar team, we do have a changing of the guard at the end of this year. I will be rotating off as the webinar team leader, as well as rotating off the Professional Development Committee, and Becca Mazer will be taking over. We still have Trevor, Tim, Jonathan, John, and Joe on the webinar team as well. So these are the folks who your emails will go to if you send your email to webinar@nwas.org. Okay, without further ado, we're going to go to the interesting stuff. Like I said, our presentation today is on Hurricane Harvey, the Major Storm, Major Challenge. And our presenters are Tom Johnstone and Jeff Evans. Tom is the meteorologist in charge of the NWS office in Corpus Christi, Texas. He's worked in the Weather Service for 25 years, and his career has included 7 offices spanning 3 Weather Service regions. Tom has an atmospheric science degree from the Ohio State University. He's an NWA member, and he's co-founder of the Middle Tennessee NWA chapter. Jeff is the meteorologist in charge of the forecast office in Houston, Galveston, Texas. He's been with the Weather Service for almost 26 years, starting with the agency in Sheridan, Wyoming, followed by the Storm Prediction Center, the Weather Service office in Tallahassee, Florida, and now as MIC at Weather Service Houston. Jeff is a former NWA Vice President, Counselor, and is the current chair of the Awards Committee. So the way we're going to do this is we are going to pass it to Tom first, and we're going to give his let him give his presentation. Then if there are any questions about Tom's presentation, you can ask them, like I said, either using hashtag NWAWebWed or using the GoToMeeting software. After we're done with questions for Tom's presentation, we'll turn it straight over to Jeff, and we'll do the same thing. So without further ado, I am turning it over to Tom.
All right, if you could just confirm you can see my screen and hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. And
all right. Excellent, thank you. Okay, the first part of this the presentation is going to focus on the landfall of Hurricane Harvey. One of the axioms we use to describe hurricanes through our core partners here is that every storm is different. Certainly Harvey was a very different storm, but it was 2 very different storms for the Corpus Christi and the Houston County warning areas, as we had devastating impacts from surge and wind, while the impacts in Houston were devastating flooding and tornadoes, and Jeff will talk about those at the second part of this. You can see here on the last few frames of this animation that shows the landfall. Harvey was an incredibly well-organized hurricane at landfall, Category 4. You can see on the GOES 16 imagery there the mesovortices that are clearly visible, rotating around the eye. And we'll show some of those on radar here in a little bit. And we're continuing to gather data, hear stories about some of those mesovortices. And I think there's maybe a lifetime of science that still can come out of this. But I'm going to focus on messaging, some of the messaging successes and challenges we had with Harvey. And I'm going to discuss what it was like to live through Harvey with some pictures from the storm as the employees here were hunkered down for about 3 days and getting the job done. So the Harvey facts, it was the first Category 4 hurricane to strike Texas since Carla, 1961. So, the Texas coast has never had a Category 5 landfall, and it had been a long time since we'd had a Category 4. Harvey was strengthening right up to landfall, so 12 more hours of time over 87-degree water, who knows what could happen. It was the first major hurricane to hit the United States since Wilma in 2005, so there was no Twitter, there were no iPhones when a major hurricane last struck the United States. So it's been a while. Harvey was a classic example of the challenge we face, both scientifically and from a messaging standpoint, with rapid intensification. We went from a depression to major hurricane in 36 hours. And I got to say up front, the Hurricane Center did an incredibly good job with this system. So their efforts certainly were tremendous and very appreciated. Its landfall pressure at 938 millibars makes it the 16th deepest hurricane at landfall. Peak wind gust was 150 miles an hour measured near Rockport. Max storm surge was 12.5 feet at the Aransas Wildlife Refuge. And there were 0 direct fatalities associated with the landfall of Harvey. And I think that's an amazing tribute to the weather enterprise, to the job the Hurricane Center did, the job that our office did, the job that our partners have done and continue to do. Really amazing. We for days after the landfall, we kept waiting for the numbers to come in, and they didn't. So it's really incredible. There was a NOAA NSSL team in Rockport with the Doppler on wheels and with upper air equipment, gathering some incredible data, which I cannot wait to get my hands on. Their anemometer there, which was about 50 feet above the ground, measured 151 miles an hour. Very well correlated with the damage we saw on some of the tallest structures around Rockport, with well into the EF3 range. They launched a weather balloon in the eye, which circled up through the eye wall. One of the interesting points from that sounding was a PWAT of 3.26 inches, which I believe, I don't have this verified independently, but I believe is the moistest sounding in the United States. So pretty incredible. We began our decision support rhythm for Harvey on the Friday before landfall. So about a week out, we sent an email to core partners as the tropical storm Harvey in the far eastern Caribbean was forecast just to trek across the Caribbean, possibly clipping the Yucatan Peninsula, and really didn't know too much from there. We use local criteria here for forecasters to generate these emails. So any potential development or impact to the Gulf of Mexico, we send an email with just a brief one-pager out to our partners. So this was the first decision support that was beyond our routine products that we sent out, just basically to keep an eye on it through the weekend into next week. On Saturday, we saw some increasing potential for some impacts of a weak system to possibly come up. We can see the American models were well to the south. Other guidance had some members that spread further up the Texas coast, but nothing too scary at this point. And really, for a lot of us, we were hoping for some much needed rain. Monday, August 21st, was the full eclipse over much of the country, and I had actually worked the day shift here at the office on Saturday. I was the long-term desk and had to deal with Harvey in my forecast. And it looked at that time still like most likely weaker system staying north-south, maybe some beneficial rain potential over the area. And I got on a plane after my shift and flew to Nashville to participate in the eclipse activities going up there. On Monday, everything started to change. All the guidance started shifting towards a much more northerly track and a stronger track with Harvey's remnants. And I literally got back to my friend's house after the eclipse, and we were winding down and just kind of talking about the eclipse in amazement. And I looked down at my phone, and there were text messages basically saying I need to get back. Harvey was going to be a problem. So I got on a plane the next day and was back for the event. It's a pretty incredible week. So on Monday, we raised things up a little bit with our decision support briefings we sent to partners, talking now about a much more high likelihood of some development in the Gulf. Still a lot of uncertainty about where it's going to go and what the impacts will be, but this was an attention getter for them. So kind of got them focused on keeping an eye on things for the rest of the week. As we got closer, I mentioned how great the Hurricane Center forecasts were. Again, we always try to stress our partners not focus on the skinny black line. And we also, this image I'm showing now, the 10 a.m. Wednesday forecast, doesn't capture the fact they were actually forecasting, if you just look at the image, a hurricane at landfall. So they're actually forecasting Cat 1 at landfall somewhere along the Middle Texas coast, anywhere from Houston to the Rio Grande, based on that cone of uncertainty. So that's really one of the limitations of the cone for our partners when they look at it. It doesn't capture the fact that actually we're forecasting a Cat 1 at landfall. And one of our messaging axioms is always to prepare for one category higher. So our briefings on Wednesday, we're telling our partners to prepare for potential Cat 2 landfall sometime late Friday. As we shifted into the Thursday forecast, things got much more ominous. By 10 a.m., the Hurricane Center was forecasting a major hurricane developing and being a major hurricane at landfall somewhere along the Middle Texas coast. They were forecasting Category 3. We're briefing, prepare for Category 4 to every one of our partners and every one of our briefings that we sent out. So this was Thursday. As we continue to see the message from the Hurricane Center evolve and our message from our office, again, 10 a.m. Wednesday, it's a tropical depression, but forecast to be a hurricane. We're saying prepare for a Category 2. 4 a.m. Thursday, still forecast to be a weaker hurricane at landfall, but you can see the organization improve. And everything really changed early Thursday morning as the forecast, as the confidence grew that a rapid intensification was ongoing and was going to continue. And we're now forecasting major hurricane at landfall. And after 10 a.m., every briefing that we had was, again, prepare for Category 4. And we were briefing throughout all the different impacts that we expected with the storm, both surge, rainfall, potential for tornadoes, and the high winds. You can see the difference there between Thursday morning and landfall, the amount of organization. The eye was incredible at landfall. It was perfectly concentric. It was scary. It was to be here in the office, and our office is located, as hopefully you can see my cursor, about 30 miles to the southwest of the eye wall. We were extremely close. It was scary to be here in the office and be that close to the system. But confidence grew in the evening that the primary impacts from the eye wall were going to stay northeast of the office. So we had a lot of decision support. We deployed meteorologists to the Corpus Christi and the Victoria EOCs for the duration. The meteorologists at the Victoria EOC ended up transitioning into supporting the state's response, the parts of the state's response to the event. We received some staffing assistance from our region, which was invaluable. Had an electronics technician and 3 very capable meteorologists sent from other offices to help fill behind and augment our staffing. We sent 40 email briefing packages through the duration of the event, led 25 webinars, but there was almost always some kind of conference call or webinar that we were participating in. It was nonstop. We did about 55 personal core partner briefings that we gave them an update, that we gave it directly to them for their community. And one thing that we found extremely valuable during Harvey was text messaging. We sent over 500 text messages to core partners. Some of those included briefings for emergency managers in and around the eye wall, actually inside the eye. They, both in Rockport, Fulton, some of those areas around Aransas Pass, they had enough time to actually coordinate rescue recovery operations in the eye, get people into shelter. We believe, and we were up there with the partners yesterday again, it looks like several dozen people were rescued during the eye of Harvey and taken to shelters. So that's pretty incredible. Shift now to the radar loop, and you can see the track wobbled, but really stayed confined, and it behaved pretty well on that northwesterly track from the Gulf of Mexico inland right over the town of Rockport. About 15 to 18,000 people live in the eye wall location of this storm. We're not sure exactly how many have evacuated. The latest information we think is about 40 or 50% did evacuate. So a lot of people, we've heard stories of people riding this out on their boats, riding this out in their homes when their homes were destroyed. But still, nobody died as a result of the landfall of this. So certainly that was some good fortune there as well. As we look at a little zoomed in look at the eye wall, you can see, even though it was a very concentric eye wall and perfectly symmetrical on satellite, when you looked at the radar data, you can see there was several mesovortices that were rotating around. We've poured through the data from our 88D. Several of these vortices had winds around 200 miles an hour, aloft 2 to 2 to 3,000 feet aloft. The maximum wind speed we can find was a mesovortex over San Jose Island, which is a unpopulated island to the east of Rockport. About 3,000 feet up, we had a 228 mile an hour pixel in there. So there's a lot of science left to discover some of the localized impacts, and certainly we did see areas where damage was much more focused, down to a couple blocks than it was in other areas. So this was our first extreme wind warning. We issued the extreme wind warning just before 5 p.m. The first extreme wind warning was in effect till 7 p.m. and this is what it looked like. Part of our after action review found that our internal after action review found that we probably pulled the trigger a little early on this extreme wind warning, especially for Rockport. But we've heard now several folks, and this was not the design or the intent of the extreme wind warning, but we know of several folks that actually evacuated as a result of this product and got out of Rockport before the eye wall got there. Our media loved this. They felt that this was really a powerful message for them to push out to folks that were watching, and I think this product saved lives. This is a map showing the impacts in terms of wind speeds. The highest reliable, these are all normalized to 10 meters. The highest reliable speed we had was 150 miles an hour near the Rockport Airport. Multiple gusts over 125 miles an hour around that area, and a pretty large area of Category 4 winds in wind gusts. Notice as you head off to the southwest from Rockport to Corpus Christi, which is not that far, maybe like I said 30 miles, we very quickly went from Category 4 winds down to Category 1 winds. And we think here at the office, our ASOS failed very early in the event. We estimated peak gusts were around 65 knots here at the airport. Again, breaking it down with some contours on there, you can see our 150 mile an hour gust just north of Rockport. We had our regional director, Stephen Cooper, here in town yesterday. We drove him out to Rockport to meet with the emergency manager and show some of the damage. And it really is an amazing difference as you go from around Portland to the east and northeast. You see some tarps on roofs and other things around Portland. And by the time you get to Aransas Pass, it looks like a big tornado went through. So it's a big change. Here's some pictures from the damage from some of our survey activities after the storm. Typical Category 1 damage around Corpus Christi, a lot of trees down, roof damage, signs blown down, some windows blown out of buildings, those kind of things. As you head east and north up the island, the damage gets a little more significant. There was also a little bit of surge as you got out on Padre Island east of Corpus Christi, but the damage was nothing like what we saw further up the coast. As you go across the bay around San Patricio County, where several of our employees live, and several of our employees had relatively significant damage to their homes, you can see the damage gets much worse, and it gets worse very quickly. And every mile or two you drive, the damage is noticeably worse. And you can also see there was some freshwater flooding around Aransas Pass as well. And the worst damage was around Rockport. So these are before and after images. The bottom left image is a Fairfield Inn where a lot of storm chasers and other folks, people in the community, even had gotten rooms there because it was supposedly a safe structure. You can see the damage to the boat facility, the after picture, the damage to the hotel. The Fairfield Inn there in Fulton is being torn down. So that it was just the first picture there was construction 2 years ago, and it's not gonna withstand. So they're gonna tear it down. I don't know if they're gonna rebuild or not. See damage to a building at the Rockport Airport and Holiday Beach area. A lot of these vacation homes and other homes that were elevated there were destroyed by the winds. So pretty catastrophic damage. And here's a nice before and after image showing the effect on the trees up there. It's an area that's pretty heavily treed with these scrubby live oak trees that are incredibly strong, and you can see the before and the after. Kind of captures both the intensity and the duration of the winds. But these live oaks are amazing. When you drive up there now, we're up in this area yesterday. Many of them have blossomed. The leaves are coming back, and it's an incredible recovery. If you go to our website, weather.gov, Corpus Christi, you can check out the Harvey write-up, and you can actually go through the storm survey yourself if you'd like and see all the dozens or hundreds of damage points that we got, just kind of to learn if you're curious what we were looking at. Storm surge, very localized, very wind-driven. It was not a typical stored storm surge system. As the storm developed very quickly, it didn't have time to build up the Ike-like wall of water to push in. So the storm surge was really driven by localized winds. on the back sides of the bay around Rockport and Aransas Pass, Port Aransas, and then on the back bay portions, on the up bay portions to the northeast of the center. So your storm came right in through here. So surge was totally different on either side of the storm, as it be expected. Max surge was in Aransas Wildlife Refuge at about 12.5 feet. And I'll show you a picture of where we measured that. It was a very unpopulated area. So here are some of the surge impacts. You can see the bottom left picture. There's one of our lead forecasters. He's about 6 feet tall, so you can see the seagrass and other things. You can see some images there of some smaller vehicles caught up in the surge, some blowout of the lower levels of some of the garages and the boat facilities, and a lot of boats washed up on shore. When we were up there right after the storm, there were boats everywhere. So a lot of that's been cleaned up. The left picture here is us actually surveying our maximum storm surge, about 12.5 feet above mean high water. You can see some washout damage to roads around Fulton, and a little comparison there of how high the water was in a garage in Holiday Beach. I think one of the better storm surge pictures we got here is around Port Lavaca, which is in the far northeast portion of our area, in the bay there. This is not that far away from the Indianola community, which was washed away and wiped away twice by hurricanes in the 19th century. But you can see a clear evidence there. The seagrass and water bottle line shows up about 10 feet above mean high water and depicts the high water mark. So we had a hindcast run of the storm surge. It's an AdCirc run, and we didn't actually have this run. It was provided to us, and you can see the flooding, the surge around Fulton, Rockport was all on the backside, and as you headed up further north, the surge was pushed into the upper portions of the bay as the water was pushed inward here and back up against the land from the west here. The Emergency Operations Center in Rockport's about 10 feet above sea level, so one of our big decision support processes through this was to brief them on surge potential in town, because they have to evacuate if the water's going to get about 7 feet deep. We consistently told them the surge was going to be on the backside, and Rockport was not affected at all, so that was a benefit for them. And here's a little zoomed in look at that hindcast. Again, forecasting maximum surge values 7 to 9 feet, and these lined up really well with what we actually observed out there with the impacts. On the NOAA aerial imagery page, the storms.ngs.noaa.gov page, excellent overflight data, really allows anyone to go in. This was actually a tool that we were using in real time to check out some of our homes, some of our neighborhoods after the storm. The data was available very quickly, but it's a way you can kind of drill down to the street level and see some of the damage. Copano Ridge, we took our Southern Region Director out to the Copano Ridge neighborhood yesterday. This was one of the hardest hit areas with dozens of homes destroyed. And you can actually step through and fly through the data yourself and kind of see how bad it was, see the impacts from the wind and even some surge impacts. Pretty powerful stuff. The hurricanes changed the Texas coastline, have for thousands or millions of years. Harvey was no different. You can see a lot of new cuts, and some of these cuts have actually healed up since Harvey. One large new cut on Matagorda Island where the surge washed through. So this is kind of stuff you can see on there. Living through Harvey was, for all of us, this was the first time that we'd had to live in the office. Even the folks that have been working at this office for 20 years have never had to experience something quite like this. More or less, we lived at the office for about 3 days. This was the shift change on Friday morning of Harvey landfall. So you can see on the far right there, the window, the hurricane shutters are not down yet. So this was the shift change on the day that landfall occurred. We had in the office about 22 people throughout this time. So it was a great team, incredible teamwork. But it was really a challenge to live for 3 days with all these folks and everything going on. But we did the best. We did the best we could. I've made the joke several times given this presentation, and it really is true that our office looked like a college spring break hotel room where 10 or 11 kids are living in a hotel room that has 2 queen-size beds. There was just, if you could find a dark, quiet space, you put down a mat or a mattress and you slept there. We had 5 or 6 people sleeping in the conference room. You can see where all the bags and everything were laid out. If you had a spot, you used it. One of the all-stars during Harvey was a shower that was put in the office about 5 years ago. I know that other regions are looking at getting showers for their coastal offices that are prone to these kind of hurricane impacts. But with 20 plus people living together in a small confined office for 3 days, the shower made it much, much more bearable. So that was a great thing to have. During the evening, as we were experiencing the strongest winds of Harvey, our ESA noticed that water was coming into the office and up through the subfloor. We believe this was just due to the incredible rainfall rates and the 50 to 65 knot winds pushing up against the north-facing side of the office. The water was coming in faster than our relatively old shop vac could vacuum it out. And you can see the water there. We've since made considerable improvements to how our wiring is under the floor, but we were going to go down. It was just a matter of time before the water depth hit a power supply or knocked some cabling out. And so, we, in the heat of battle with near hurricane conditions outside, we radioed the airport, and they brought over a high-powered shop vac, which combined with our other shop vac, we vacuumed and dumped water for 7.5 hours from the subfloor into a drain somewhere else in the office. And that was a team of meteorologists and ETs that just took turns doing that. So that was one of the typical kinds of heroic efforts that happen in these kind of storms, where you just do what you got to do to stay up. Some observational challenges. It's kind of a little personal thing for me that I continue to notice with these storms. This weather station I'm showing now is on the island of Barbuda. It's an island of around, before Irma, it was around 2,000 people. I don't know how many are left now, but this weather station remained functional and transmitting up to winds over 150 miles an hour. So that was really incredible. That was able to happen. That didn't happen with National Weather Service observing equipment in Harvey. All of our ASOS went down that were in the affected areas. We were down here at Corpus Christi around 6:30 p.m. As soon as power went out, Rockport went down earlier, and they had significant damage where their wind tower was actually blown over, snapped, and there was other damage to the site. So we don't really have any National Weather Service data from Harvey's landfall in terms of rainfall at these sites or wind measurements or those kind of things. So I really think that's something we need to take a look at. If we want to have Weather Service observational data during major hurricane landfalls, we need to have equipment that can handle it. If they're just for observational data to maintain aviation operations, then I guess that's what it is. Luckily, we have a pretty robust network of NOAA-owned sensors along our coastlines that we're able to gather all the other data and provide real-time information about wind gusts like 130, 135 miles an hour. And lastly, a challenge when you're dealing with observational systems is you never know what you're going to find. When we finally got up to Rockport to begin doing some maintenance at the site, the ACU portion of the ASOS equipment there is in a building at the Rockport Airport. The cabinet is in this room that I'm showing here, and our ETs opened up the door to go in to start doing some repairs, and we're shocked to see a cache of fully automatic 30 caliber machine guns. Turns out the Marines, where they're doing recovery operations, had stashed these guns in there. We didn't know they were in there, and it was kind of a shock to see. But these are the kind of things in the major hurricanes that you don't expect. You never know what you're going to see next, and it's just kind of a crazy thing. So that's the end of my presentation, and I guess if there's any questions, we can handle them, and then we'll turn it over to Jeff. So I'll turn over my control now.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tom. The only question that I have from the GoToMeeting software so far is that in one of your earlier slides, when you were showing the radar with the two black lines on either side of the eye wall, somebody was asking what is the distance between those two black lines. Do you know off the top of your head?
It's approximately 40 miles. The eye was about 30 miles across, so I don't know an exact estimate. I'll find out.
Okay. All right. And Trevor, do you have anything on Twitter with a hashtag?
At the moment, no, but I'll let you know afterwards if we have any.
Okay. Well, then I guess we will turn it over to Jeff. Thank you so much, Tom.
You're welcome.
All right, Trish, this is Jeff here. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can hear you and see you just fine.
All right, just good, great. So Yeah, as Tom alluded to, Harvey was kind of a two-storm system. We were watching as well, Harvey as it was moving across the Caribbean, and then as it was going to get into the Gulf of Mexico. Our forecast area goes down towards Matagorda Bay, so we also were working the kind of hurricane landfall part of the storm. But really about early part of the week, Monday, Tuesday, prior to Harvey, it became more and more apparent that we could be dealing with a significant amount of rainfall as the models were continuing to come into a consensus that Harvey was going to move inland and then just kind of hang out for 3 or 4 days. And that's pretty much a nightmare scenario for rainfall, especially being on the right side of the storm, and then given the vulnerabilities to flooding around the upper Texas coast. It certainly became a bigger and bigger problem. So several pictures up here on the screen. One of them I point to is that Harvey Hero. If you can see that, the aircraft, the operations there for Harvey ended up being their largest natural disaster response ever for Harvey. So it ended up being a massive response effort, both from the federal side as well as just from the communities, the volunteers. So really for us, Harvey became a system that just wouldn't leave. The duration of Harvey was just something that was kind of hard for us to comprehend going into it. So Harvey really became so large, it's hard to give it just a 20, 30-minute talk on Harvey that we just kind of find it's best to kind of look at some of the impacts and some of the pictures and just let Harvey tell his own story. And so that's what we're going to do here, kind of moving forward here for this talk. And this slide is kind of something that Tom already hit on. It was the first Category 4 storm to strike the Texas coast. You can see Carla's track and a radar image of Carla from 1961. But it was also the first named storm on record anywhere in the Gulf Coast that made 2 landfalls greater than 60 hours apart. So it's a testament to kind of how rare the behavior of Harvey really was as far as in the historical historical framework that we work under here. 60.5 inches, 60.58. That's our max rainfall that we have right now. We're still looking through a lot of rainfall analysis. We being the Lake Charles Forecast Office, which serves the Beaumont, Port Arthur area, and then us here in Houston for around Galveston Bay. So certainly a significant amount of rainfall. Going into Harvey, 48 inches was the amount on record for a tropical storm. And so that's kind of what we were dealing with going into it. Amelia was the previous record holder, and then 52 inches was the U.S. rainfall record down in Hawaii for any tropical storm in the U.S. So we ended up with over a dozen reports with Harvey that would have broken the U.S. record. And then the 60.5 certainly shatters that record. We also had some 60-inch totals and backyard gauges here around near the forecast office here in Galveston County that we're still kind of sort out and trying to figure out exactly what to do with some of these backyard gauges. The 60.58 inches was measured in a county gauge there in Jefferson County, right near Beaumont, Port Arthur. So this is just a contrast or comparison between Allison. Allison was the storm of record for flooding in Houston, massive catastrophic flood event. But the alarming thing is when you look at these two storms side by side is that these color scales are the same. So the blues and light greens that really devastated Houston and massive amount of flooding. You can see just and pretty much encompassed the entire upper Texas coast with Harvey. And then we've had, some totals there that doubled what Allison produced in 2001. So certainly just a massive rain event. It's just staggering in proportions and staggering to comprehend. The Houston metropolitan area is a huge area, and you go all the way over towards Beaumont, Port Arthur. It's almost there's just a small break there where it's not urban, and pretty much the entire footprint there was inundated with over 3 feet of rain. And so this kind of hits that point. This is a GIS image shortly after the storm created by Southern Region Headquarters, where we're looking at 6.5 million people that were impacted by 30 inches or more rain from Friday through Wednesday. So just a staggering amount of rainfall. and a staggering footprint as far as the impacts go. 6.5 million is certainly a massive amount of people to be dealing with this kind of water. So when you put that footprint in perspective, these were slides and images from John Nielsen Gammon from Texas A&M University. He's the state climatologist for Texas. When you put that overlay that Harvey footprint, you could see it covers all of New England with 30 inches or more rainfall. So just a significant amount. He also looked at all U.S. storms as far as the area coverage goes of rainfall. So anything greater than 10,000 square miles over 5 days, he kind of ranked those rainfall events out, and you can see how high Harvey is. It completely sets itself apart. And then we get a lot of questions about climate change with the rainfall and the impacts. He actually looked through the statistics of it and looking at what the contribution may have been, and he kind of highlighted that at the top of the graph. So certainly there was a contribution, but nothing, certainly a small contribution to just a massive event with Harvey. So here are going some more numbers, 16 inches in 3 hours. That was a measured rainfall. You can see the gauge plot there in the bar graph. And at Clear Creek, the picture there, that red line, that's the normal channel for Clear Creek. So you can see how far out of Banks it was. That's I-45, about 2 miles north of the office. Here at the forecast office. And then just upstream of that, we had measured 6.6 inches in 1 hour, just up from that. And just off this picture here would be the neighborhood that our electronic service analyst, or ESA for the office, where his house was. He had actually invested in raising his house a few years back, about 10 feet. Fortunately, he had water up to the threshold of his house, just within millimeters of coming in, lost his garage, both cars, and all of his neighbors had water up to the eaves, pretty much a complete loss in many of the homes in that neighborhood. So this is just one of the creeks, and you think about this, this is just one of the watersheds. All of the watersheds, for the most part, across Southeast Texas look like this. There's a massive amount of flooding for anyone who lived near a creek, a bayou, a flood reservoir, or anything like that. Certainly dealt with a significant amount of flooding. These are statistics that came from Jeff Lindner at the Harris County Flood Control District, looking back at some of his analytics on the water. He estimates 1 trillion gallons of water fell just on Harris County alone, which is highlighted in red there, which would have filled the Astrodome 3,200 times and would have run Niagara Falls all by itself for 15 days. That's just for Harris County. So just giving you an estimate of how much water really fell with Harvey over about a 5-day window. This tweet we grabbed from someone there at the NASA JPL. They look at subsidence, and looking at his sensors, they found that Harvey's flood was so large that 2 centimeters was the estimated how much the Earth sank from Harvey around Houston. I haven't gone back to look to see if there's been a recovery, if it's risen back up or not, but certainly just shows the weight and the volume and the amount of water that fell there on Harris County. So 31, we have just nearly half of our river forecast points that we forecast here from the river forecast centers and here from the forecast office in Houston Galveston. 31 of 67 set new records, some of those by a large margin. Typically for a big event, you might have a handful or maybe a dozen or so that might go into flood stage, maybe even major flood stage. To have 31 set new records is almost unprecedented around the area and then perhaps nationwide. And you can see the magnitude there in some of these images of the flooding through downtown and just through some of the subdivisions and areas around the Houston metropolitan area. So not only was this a large forecast, but looking at 31 new records was also a large post-event survey effort from the office, trying to get out and find out what these impacts are. You know, when you're trying to brief river flooding along watersheds and in mainstem rivers for decision makers, what they really want to know is, what is this going to flood? And when you hit a record, it's difficult to provide a good answer because, we don't know. We've never seen record water this high at this stage. And so that, we're trying to go back and document, so at least we have that for going forward. So we're looking at just in Harrison, Galveston counties alone, where you're looking at 155,000 structures flooded. It could be or somewhere near 250,000 flooded structures in Texas from Harvey. When you compare that with Allison, again, under the flood record going into Harvey, you're looking at 73,000 structures flooded in Allison. We doubled that for Harvey. And there's some other pictures there, looking at neighborhoods post-storm. Tragically, this is what it looked like. Pretty much every subdivision had some area that had some homes that would flood. The home there in the foreground, there's actually a friend of mine, and he had about 4 feet of water in his home. So you can imagine dealing with that. And it wasn't like it just came in and came down. Some of these homes stayed flooded for days, if not weeks. Sadly, 80% of flood victims here in Harvey didn't have flood insurance. That's the estimate from the Consumer Federation of America. And sadly, this is a common theme. This is our fourth kind of federal natural disaster since 2015 for flooding in the Houston metro area. Every one of those dealt with numbers similar to this, 70 to 80% without flood insurance. Majority of the structures outside of the 1 in 100 year floodplain. So you're dealing with a perception that people didn't need flood insurance. My realtor said I didn't need it, is something that we hear over and over. It's something that we've been trying to combat, but there's a difference between what's required and what's needed, especially with flood insurance. And if you live in Southeast Texas, the message from us is that you need it, and that if you're not in the 100 year floodplain, it's cheaper and you should have it. But it's certainly a very difficult message to get out. And it's costing this nation just basically billions of dollars over and over and over each time these events continue to occur. The Texas Attorney General estimated 1 million vehicles, a million cars may have flooded from Harvey. We even had some dealerships near the office here in Dickinson that had a complete loss. You can see some pictures there from some car dealerships around the area. And there's just staging areas around College Station, other motorways and speedways where they're actually taking and trying to haul these vehicles up and trying to collect them and dispose of them. So certainly a staggering toll on the vehicle fleet around the upper Texas coast. In addition, about $2 million in ag losses from Harvey. This came from the Texas A&M Agri-Life Extension Service. This is both with crops, with livestock, and with infrastructure, barns and fences and things of that nature. So another large impact. So it was a big urban flood, but it was also a big big rural flood as well. And so the surrounding communities were hit equally as hard with their livelihood and their livestock and crops. So it could be the costliest storm in U.S. history. Some of the estimates, and I've got some quotes up here and where that report came from, at least $198 billion in damages is possible. I've seen estimates from about 100 up to almost $200 billion. I think this will all have to play out over time. But you can see that it extends from, you can see a picture, there's some hurricane damage in Rockport, and then of some flooding damage in Houston, and then over towards the Beaumont, Port Arthur area. So I'm trying to capture the scope there with some of these images, but you can see the damages and the amount of money loss in just damages alone. Another estimate is about $15 billion in economic losses as the ports and refineries had to close and shut down for days, if not weeks. This really wasn't necessarily from direct storm damage to the infrastructure as much as it was a problem with the navigation up the port, into the ports and then into the refineries from the stream flows, the water flowing out into the bays, through the rivers and drainages. The volume of water was so intense that it made navigation extremely dangerous, and so they were shutting the ports down. In addition to that, a lot of the refineries, the employees were unable to get to work for days, if not weeks. So both of those were big contributors and shutting things down. And I think everyone around the nation saw the gas prices go up pretty quickly after Harvey, and really this is why. And I'm not sure those prices actually have gone down to where they were pre-Harvey. So probably still seeing some trickling impacts there around the nation economically from the loss there with the refineries and ports closing. So 117 hours, that's the longest lasting storm after making landfall. It's a nice image from the Weather Channel I captured online. So you can see where it made landfall there around Rockport, as Tom showed, stalled up over Texas a day later, meandered back over the water, made a second landfall. And then it didn't pretty much dissipate completely until it got up into northern Louisiana. So 117 hours, that doubles the previous Texas record for landfall of Hurricane Fern in 1971, which also made landfall right around the Rockport area as well. So because of that, our forecast area here in Houston, Galveston, we spent almost 7 straight days under tropical storm watches or warnings. So that was a staggering amount. I think that's got to be a record in the United States for continuous tropical storm products being put out. What that means is basically just an increased workload, an increased staff model for the office. We went to 12-hour shifts as we got into the tropical product suite, and we weren't able to get out of that for about 7 days. So that was a big toll on the staff. We were fully staffed going into it, but we were, 12-hour shifts, usually 6 to 9 on the night shift and 10 to 12 on the day shift, trying to run that for 7 straight days. You can imagine the toll it was taking on people just trying to keep the services up as Harvey just lingered around. In addition, we spent 4 full days under tornado watch continuously. We issued 157 tornado warnings between Friday morning and Monday evening. That's more tornado warnings in that 4 or 5 day window than we issued in the 5 previous years combined out of this office. We do have 29 confirmed tornadoes but most of those came from social media, from tweets, from messaging to the office from emergency managers. We really were not able to go out and do surveys because of the rainfall and just the persistent threat. That wasn't safe, and a lot of these areas became inaccessible pretty quickly from floodwaters. But some of these were pretty substantial tornadoes. You can see some of the images there with Harvey. So we definitely dealt with quite a bit of tornado damage. We'll never really know, unfortunately, how many tornadoes we actually did have. In addition to that, we had 62 flash flood warnings over 6 days. Really, most of those were over 4 days, including numerous flash flood emergencies. At one point, we pretty much had the entire Houston metropolitan area under a flash flood emergency with this system. We were also dealing with messaging out civil emergency messages from our county partners. You can see here I have one highlighted where they're requesting people to escape to get on their roof. That's how high the water was getting. That messaging had never been put out before from some of these communities and from us as an office. So certainly a very significant event. At one point we were certainly uncertain what the death toll was going to be. We were very fearful that we were going to have a Katrina-like death toll where we were finding people in their attics and things as the waters receded. But fortunately, for whatever the reason, we were didn't have near the death toll as we were worried about at the height of the storm. So in total, we issued over 272 warnings: tornado, flash flood, severe, aerial flood, or marine warnings. You could see an overlay of all the warnings that we had issued with Harvey, as well as our officer at shift change. I think that was on Monday morning. Part of the problems that we were dealing with these numerous warnings was a lot of times the call to actions contradicted each other. So, here's an example where we have a tornado warning out for people that are riding it out on their roof from floodwaters. What do we expect people to do in that situation? So that's a tough thing to deal with as we get into these very event-specific warnings. And something that as an agency and as media, as messaging-wise, we need to try to maybe do a better job at and trying to figure out exactly how to handle that when you get into this kind of situation. Social media was huge for the office. It was the first time that we specifically staffed someone to manage social media 24 hours a day through the event. It was big both in pushing messages out, as some of these tweets I show here, but it was equally as big, if not larger, in getting information back. At one point, during the height of the Saturday night flooding, which was the worst flooding in the event, in the Sunday morning, 911 systems were overwhelmed, and we were actually getting requests for people to get help. They were reaching out to @NWS Houston on Twitter and things. So we were able to relay some of those to emergency management and try to answer the best we could. So it was a big presence, not only in pushing messaging out, but also getting stuff in and getting reports and giving us a better handle on exactly what was occurring out there as far as the impacts go. Given that duration and the impacts, you can imagine how busy we were, but we ended up with 20 to 25 a day webinars or conference calls. We ended up with about 200 to 250 coordination calls, webinars, conference calls over a 10-day period. Some of these continued for weeks, if not a month. Some of the navigation calls for the port areas and marine areas went on for about a month afterwards. This does not include just the informal calls that you get, to the WCM, to the MIC, to the hydrologist from EMs, just texting or calling on the cell phone. So these are the more formal services. We also had, in addition to the flooding, we had a plant in our Arkema plant in Crosby that the floodwaters compromised the cooling systems, and they started having explosions. They had to do a lot of evacuations, and we ended up doing about 18 spots in addition to all this for that plant up there in Crosby post-Harvey. So this is actually a screen capture from one of our briefings, the one that went out just about 3 or 4 hours before the flash flood emergencies initially went out there in Houston Metro, where we were actually beginning to message and actually push out directly some of the high resolution guidance, not as a perfect prog, as you say, and we understood that there might be some imperfections in what this high resolution guidance was showing, but the messaging we were trying to portray was this is what the atmosphere is capable of. Don't focus on where this is actually bullseyeing, but take a look at your area and realize that, we were at this point, the HER was showing 15 inches of rain up into northern Galveston County, up into Harris County. So, over a foot of rain that night. We ended up getting double that, but still, this was a big message for us. Most of the day Saturday was a lull. Harvey made landfall Friday. We had a lull in the weather most of the afternoon on Saturday, and then we had Saturday night was the Mayweather fight. We had a lot of things going on. People wanted to get out. Thought maybe we dodged a bullet with Harvey, and we were truly trying to message that no, Harvey for this area is just beginning. We had an initial round Friday night, a lull, and then this is going to be the worst night is what we were trying to message. Some of the people got it, some of the emergency managements got it, some didn't, but this type of message really did help hit home that we certainly were not out of the woods yet. So as some know, we are co-located. We're the only National Weather Service office that's co-located with emergency management. Just down the hall, across the hall from us, they were putting up papers for water rescues, the requests coming in, and they were just trying to manually plot them out, addresses, and then going by and checking those that have been rescued, those that still needed to be rescued. This is just a small picture of some of that. It was an extensive list, but just wanted to kind of get a handle on that. And it just, for our staff, it really did hit home what was going on in the community, how bad it really was. The office here was actually a staging area at one point for some people going into shelters. They'd pick them up at dump trucks, but place them here downstairs and then move them on to shelters. So we really got to witness a lot of it firsthand, and a lot of the first responders were staging here and staying the night here at the facility. So for our staff, the office was cut off for a period of time there. Early Sunday morning, there was some concern whether or not we'd be able to get relief to the night shift that worked at Saturday night. The folks that were working here Saturday night were really first responders. They were dealing with trying to stay on mission, at the same time getting texts and calls from their families and loved ones asking what to do. Are we going to flood? Some of the people were dealing with water getting up close to their houses. So certainly a difficult thing. The screen capture there was actually a picture I took on my commute into work that was taken just about half a mile from the office on the one road that we could use to get in to the office there on Sunday morning. So we had about, you could see here on the screen, 2 forecasters had to wade through waist deep water to try to catch a ride to get to work or to get home. We had 3 members here of the staff that dealt with water in their homes or a flood loss. One member, Weather Service member of the Central Weather Service unit there that serves the FAA, pretty much had 4 feet of water in his house around Meyerland, dealt with significant flood damage. We had 6, we had 1 employee here that had just started with our office on that Monday before Harvey. She didn't get home for 6 days because of the flood waters, and we also had 6 with a number of consecutive 12-hour night and day shifts that we had to work. we had up to 8 people at one point trapped and couldn't get home. So we were, like Corpus, we were kind of tiptoeing around and trying to let people sleep. One of the messages that we had going into this was that we couldn't just stay up all night long. This was not a sprint. This was a marathon. This was going to go on for days. So we were really vigilant that when people were off shift, we left them off shift to let them get their rest because we knew the next night could be just as bad. So unfortunately, there were, a storm like this, you're going to have a toll. The estimates of about 75 to 80 fatalities from Harvey. That does include some indirect, but the majority of these were flood victims. 50 alone in the greater Houston area drowned from Harvey. As far as we know, this is the largest death toll in the Houston area from a weather event since the 1900 storm Galveston hurricane. So certainly a significant event there. One of the gentlemen there, the African-American gentleman there in the white shirt, was actually a driving instructor that actually gave my daughter her driving test a month before Harvey. So certainly for our community here, we also felt that loss. And that gentleman, as well as several others that we lost, were actually out in the water trying to help other people. So the rescue efforts, the volunteer Cajun Navy, as they call it, and everyone else that came out with boats was significant in helping the first responders and saving lives, but certainly it always comes at a loss. And the family there that's grieving, that was a family. They had 6 family members in a van that drowned in Greensboro Bayou trying to get out of the floodwaters. And the final number is a question mark, and that's the most important, which is the number of lives that we saved. It's a number that we can't measure, but it's certainly the number that we're most proud of, because we know that there was a significant saving of lives because of the response efforts were just almost immediate. The staging of resources, the staging of first responders going into Harvey allowed them to just start rescuing people almost immediately. So it wasn't an event where the flooding started and then they had to get people in and then start getting out to rescue people. Had that happened, we certainly would have lost hundreds more. Galveston County has a quote there. He said he has no doubt the Weather Service forecast helped save hundreds, if not 1,000 lives with Harvey, because they were able to just immediately get out and get to people. So again, that's the message we don't know, or the number we don't know, but certainly the most important. So that's my last slide there to show if I'm here for questions if you have any.
Wow, thank you, Jeff. Fascinating. We do have a few questions that have come in, some that have come in for Tom as well. So this is probably going to carry over past the top of the hour. And I'm not sure if Trevor has any on GoToMeeting, but we can go back and forth as necessary. One of the questions for Tom that came in late was, what criteria determines whether you deploy to an EOC versus providing IDSS from your WFO?
We have agreements in place with Victoria, Laredo, and Corpus Christi to deploy meteorologists for certain thresholds that have been set, and one of them is something like Harvey coming through. Obviously, and we're very upfront with this. We can't guarantee we'll be there, but we're going to make every effort to. And I think that's why I made the point during the presentation that having the meteorologists, the well-qualified meteorologists, sent to our office to fill behind our deployed personnel was critical for us to be able to do that.
Okay. This question is actually for both of you. Did you guys use EAP services after Harvey?
Yes, so we both did, and it certainly was very helpful to come and bring somebody in to sit down and just talk about it. We talk about Harvey from the impacts and from scientists were fascinated with the meteorology of it, but as people, it did impact all of us individually a little bit differently. It's something that we did recognize and certainly wanted to be conscious of. And so yes, we did. And I don't know, Tom, if you wanted to chime in on that as well.
We did, and a couple, at least one employee also used individual EAP counseling. It affected us all. We still kind of feel it. We had 2 employees here that worked both Harvey, and Irma. We deployed a couple meteorologists to Key West and or Miami. So it was a significantly impactful experience for a lot of us, and the EAP was very good, very helping for us.
And for those of you who didn't know, the EAP is what the Weather Service has an employee assistance program. So that's what I should have clarified that to begin with. All right, here's another question for Jeff, and it's kind of long, so let me just bear with me for a second. What has the Weather Service learned from Harvey's extreme rainfall with regard to communicating to the public expected extreme events? WPC and Greg Carbon really stuck his neck out 2 days in advance with 50+ inches forecast, which was an excellent prediction. Do you think it will ever be possible to forecast extreme rainfall events in time to evacuate large areas? And by the way, the Weather Service deserves a gold medal for Harvey.
Yeah, I appreciate that last comment, but the message was difficult, and yes, the WPC was phenomenal in their assistance with us, as was the Hurricane Center, the National Centers, and the River Forecast Center were all phenomenal. So I didn't want this just to be a Houston specific for the flood. But yeah, that 50 inches, we were trying to coordinate and communicate as a Weather Service office as a whole before we would put those 50 inches out to make sure we were all in agreement with that. The problem that we were dealing with is that when you start messaging something that somebody has never seen, it's very difficult to get people to really either comprehend what it could do or believe you. So we had some emergency managers that did take more action than others. We had the city of Alvin, we found out afterwards, actually put a curfew in place going into the Saturday night with the big flood. But the community itself pushed back and didn't want that curfew, so they relented a little bit and ended up regretting that decision. So it's very difficult, and the lessons learned, we're still trying to figure out how best to message that. I mean, we were using terms like catastrophic, life-threatening, epic. We were trying to hit that hard, but those are just words. Getting people to really believe it certainly is a tough sell. That's one lesson going forward. As far as evacuating major urban areas, the problem that we would deal with that is we don't really know exactly which watershed is going to get it. It turns out in this one it was all of them. So the last thing we would have wanted was to give a message that people could get away from the floodwaters when the rain started and find shelter. Most of the people that we lost were people moving around in the water. We lost a few people in their homes or businesses, but just a handful. It's a mixed message. We could, if we'd have known 2 days ahead of time and could have evacuated all the watersheds, yes, but where would they have gone? There really wasn't a place that we could identify that would be a safe place. And as I said, our biggest message was to stay where you're at and let people come save you. And I think that message alone saved a lot of lives.
Okay. Another question for Jeff. I've got two more here on the GoToWebinar, and then we'll see if Trevor has any. So another question for Jeff here. How did you use Tropical Storm Allison as a point of reference or comparison in the forecast leading up to this event?
Yeah, we're reluctant to make direct comparisons because, as Tom said in his, every storm is different. But we did mention Allison. We also mentioned Tropical Storm Claudette, which set the U.S. rainfall, 24-hour rainfall record here in Alvin, here in Galveston County, at 43 inches in 1 day. So we were saying this could be Allison or Claudette to try to message that. So it was a tool that we did utilize, but we didn't want to focus too much on Allison because we weren't sure if it was going to be the same part of the city, for instance, that was going to get hit, and we didn't want people to say, hey, I didn't flood in Allison, so I'd be okay in this one. So it's a tough message to have, but I think it's something we did use, and we'll probably use it again. But it's certainly, you have to be careful with some caveats.
Sure. Okay, for both Tom and Jeff, how did GO16 help you in your forecasting or watch warning issuance or just in general?
Tom, I'll let you take that one because I know you might have dealt with that more with the landfall part there.
Yeah, for the landfall, it was very powerful representation of the storm structure as it neared the coast, how it was strengthening, becoming better organized. The visual imagery was fascinating in terms of what we could see in there. It was amazing, really. And I think it was really just it was another tool that we utilized for us to understand the scope, the magnitude of the impacts that we were about to feel. So it was incredible.
Yeah, and really for the Houston office, especially for the visible imagery, it helped on the convective side as far as looking at the tornado warnings and the diurnal activity as it would build up in the late afternoons. But most of our heavy rainfall was after dark. So certainly we used a lot just the radar and the rainfall reports we were getting, and it just got to the point where it was just everywhere was flooding. So just looking at the storm gauges, the rain gauges and stuff was the biggest tool at one point for us.
Okay. I don't see any other questions with the GoToMeeting software. Trevor, what do you have on Twitter?
Actually, just a whole bunch of commentary. A lot of people giving you guys praise and eye-opening tweets about the numbers that you guys gave. I actually had a question I wanted to ask you guys. I actually tweeted it to Jeff just now, but I know that both of you have a very large Spanish-speaking audience in your CWAs, both in Corpus and in Houston. Can you speak a little bit about serving those populations, or what resources you use in order to do so?
We had we like Jeff, we used rotating 12+ hour shifts. So we had a bilingual employee on both shifts. So we always had a Spanish speaker on shift during Harvey's, throughout the entirety of the storm. We translated all of our social media, all of our tweets went out bilingual, and we handled a lot of interviews and phone call requests in Spanish. So it was great. We also made use, the Southern region of the National Weather Service has a team that provides additional support in Spanish language, and there was some utilization of that as well. But having the local capabilities in-house was tremendous.
Yeah, and I'll echo a lot of what Tom said. In the tweet there that we had retweeted by the president's account was a dual language tweet, and we ended up getting 5 million impressions of that. So we had going into the event, we had a couple of folks here working on coming up with some templates in Spanish for different hazards, and that was a big plus that we had that ready to go. We do not have a Spanish speaker on staff, so that's something that we would have to, when we get requests, we would push those over to San Antonio or other areas. There is a Spanish-speaking response team for media requests at the region. But at one point, the event really got so big, we surprisingly did not get a lot of media during and after Harvey, because the story was telling itself basically out in the floodwaters. And most of that was kind of being addressed, outside of the office. So, but yeah, it's something that we do recognize, and we certainly do the best we can, and especially with the social media aspect.
Yeah, I don't have any other questions from Twitter, so thanks for answering mine.
Okay, there's one more. Oh, this is for us in the NWA. Somebody's asking we're going to do a similar presentation for Irma, Maria for the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. The answer to that is I don't know yet. We haven't scheduled. Let's see, we've got our December webinar scheduled, but we haven't started working on 2018 yet. So that's something that we can look into. Like I said in my introduction, if anybody has any suggestions, you are free to email the webinar@nwas.org email address, and that way it can go to everybody, and we can try to find somebody to present on some of the topics as you guys have requests. All right, seeing nothing else, thank you so much, Tom and Jeff. We really appreciate it, and you guys, hopefully those of you who can will join us for our December webinar Wednesday, which is actually, I don't remember right off the top of my head. We couldn't do it December 6th. I don't remember if it's the 13th or the 20th. I think it's the 20th. Is that right, Trevor?
Yeah, it's the 20th. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the 20th. We don't have I don't think I have the time yet, but Pam Heinzelman will be discussing some warn-on forecast information for everybody. So we'll get more information out as soon as possible. I know, again, it's not the first Wednesday of the month, but we were trying to avoid overlapping with the finals week, stuff like that. And I guess that's it. So thank you all very much, and we will see you next month.